Time magazine called him the unsung hero behind the internet. CNN called him a father of the internet. President Bill Clinton called him one of the great minds of the information age. He has been voted history's greatest scientist of African descent. He is Philip Emeagwali. He's coming to Trinidad and Tobago to launch the 2008 Kwame Ture lecture series on Sunday, June 8th at the JFK Auditorium, UWI St. Augustine, 5 p.m. The Emancipation Support Committee invites you to come and hear this inspirational mind address the theme, crossing new frontiers to conquer today's challenges. This lecture is one you cannot afford to miss. Admission is free, so be there on Sunday, June 8th, 5 p.m. at the JFK Auditorium, UWI St. Augustine.
Over the years, I realized that in Africa, a breakthrough technology is a sacred object. The African that invents a groundbreaking technology can occupy the position between Albert Einstein and Nelson Mandela, and occupy that position in the minds of Africans at home and in the diaspora. That African inventor is invited to sit on the African high table. The invention of the fastest supercomputer is a concrete and visible achievement that everybody understands as pushing the frontier of technology, as well as the boundary of human knowledge. None of the 25,000 vector processing supercomputer programmers of the 1980s showed the massively parallel processing supercomputer some love. In the 1970s and 80s, the terra incognita that was the emerging field of massively parallel processing supercomputing was as empty as a ghost town that had only one permanent resident. I, Philip Emeagwali, was that permanent resident of the farthest frontier of supercomputing called massively parallel processing. In the 1980s, I discovered the massively parallel processing supercomputer to be like a book that sat on the library shelf for 108 years and sat without once being checked out. I was the only full-time programmer of the most massively parallel processing supercomputer of the 1980s. I visualized that massively parallel processing supercomputer as a small copy of the internet. The reason my experimental discovery made the news headlines was that for the 4 decades onward of 1946, the parallel processing machine was a supercomputer hopeful that no supercomputer scientist understood what made it super. The new supercomputer that I invented on the 4th of July 1989 in turn gave birth to a new field of computer science. A new supercomputer gives birth to a new computer science. The May 8, 1987 issue of the Chronicle of Higher Education carried an article that was titled, quote, "Some hail computational science as biggest advance since Newton Galileo," unquote. Fast forward 3 years. The June 27, 1990 issue of the Chronicle of Higher Education carried an article that proclaimed that I, Philip Emeagwali, had made the biggest advance in computational science. Back in 1989, one of the science news headlines was that an African supercomputer wizard in the United States had experimentally discovered how and why parallel processing makes modern computers faster and makes the new supercomputer the fastest, and invented how and why to use that new supercomputer knowledge to build a new supercomputer that encircled the globe in the way the internet does. I am that African supercomputer scientist that was in the news back in 1989. I was in the news for inventing the massively parallel processing supercomputer. I was in the news for inventing that new supercomputer across a new internet that was a new global network of 65,536 tightly coupled processors. I was in the news for experimentally discovering that new supercomputer in Los Alamos, New Mexico, United States, and for experimentally discovering that new supercomputer at 8:15 in the morning of Tuesday, the 4th of July, 1989, the U.S. Independence Day. I was in the news for theoretically and experimentally discovering that parallel processing is an entirely new way of supercomputing across thousands or millions or billions of commodity off-the-shelf processors that were identical and that were equal distances apart and that encircled a globe in 16-dimensional hyperspace and encircled it in the manner the internet encircled the earth in 3-dimensional space. At first, my experimental discovery of the massively parallel processing supercomputer was ridiculed, mocked, and rejected. Everybody in the supercomputer community said I had made an embarrassing mistake, but every supercomputer scientist was embarrassingly mistaken. I was in the news because I invented how to synchronously communicate and how to simultaneously compute and how to communicate and compute together and how to do both as one seamless cohesive unit. That cohesive unit was my new supercomputer de facto. That cohesive unit was defined around a 16-dimensional hyperball that is a new internet by definition. That cohesive unit was a supercomputing machinery that I used to send and receive emails to and from 65,536 or 2 to power 16 16-bit long email addresses. It was not enough that I knew the Emeagwali internet. I knew that internet back in 1974. I knew that new internet as a new supercomputer. That new internet that was a never-before-seen computer must know Emeagwali as its sole programmer and inventor.
Insightful and brilliant lecture.